It was 11:47 at night when my son sent the text. I had just turned off the lamp in my bedroom and was lying in the dark, listening to the rain tap against the window the way it does in November in Ohio, soft and steady and a little lonely. I was almost asleep when my phone lit up on the nightstand. "Mom, Renee and I have been talking. The house feels crowded when you're here on weekends. Her parents are coming for Thanksgiving and she needs everyone to be comfortable. I think it's better if you just don't come this year. I hope you understand." I read it twice, then a third time. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling. "My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 63 years old. I taught 8th grade English for 31 years at Eastwood Middle School in Columbus, and I know something about words. I know how they work. I know what people mean when they choose one word over another. And I know that my son did not say, 'I hope you understand,' because he expected me to understand. He said it because he hoped I would disappear quietly. The house he was talking about was my house, not his, mine. The one I bought after my husband Gerald passed away 6 years ago, when I sold our family home in Bexley and moved into a smaller place. And then, because my son and his wife were struggling with their mortgage and I still had most of the life insurance, I made the decision that I now sit with every single day. I bought them a house, $312,000. A 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville with a 2-car garage and a backyard big enough for the grandchildren I kept hoping for. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself it was what Gerald would have wanted. I told myself that family is family, and that money is just money, and that you can't take it with you. What I didn't tell myself was the truth, that I was buying a seat at the table, that I was paying to be loved. I should have known better. I was an English teacher. I had read enough Greek tragedies. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My son. I'll call him my son, because that's who he is, whoever he has become. Married Renee 4 years ago. I liked her at first. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who sends follow-up emails and keeps a color-coded calendar. When they got engaged, I took her to lunch at a place she chose in the short north, and she was perfectly pleasant. She complimented my earrings. She asked about my teaching career with what seemed like genuine interest. Her mother, Connie, was a different matter. I met Connie at the rehearsal dinner, which Connie had organized at a restaurant in Dublin, so expensive that I winced when I saw the menu prices. She arrived in a white linen blazer and a smile that did everything except reach her eyes, and she shook my hand with both of hers like a politician working a rope line. "Gerald would have loved this place," I said, trying to find something to say. "Oh, is that the father?" Connie asked. "Such a shame he can't be here. Not, 'I'm sorry for your loss.' Not, 'It must be hard to go through this without him.' Just such a shame." And then she turned to say hello to someone else. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself first impressions are deceiving. I told myself that what mattered was my son. And my son was happy, and happy was enough. For a while, it was. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville, the first year of their marriage. I visited every few weeks, always calling ahead, always bringing something, a casserole or a pie or fresh tomatoes from my garden. Renee was usually warm enough when it was just the two of them. It was when her mother was around that things shifted. Connie came to Columbus from Cincinnati 3 or 4 times a year, and every time she came, suddenly my son and his wife had no room in their schedule for me. Sunday dinners got cancelled. Text messages went unanswered for days. Once I drove over with a birthday cake for my son, his 32nd birthday. Chocolate with cream cheese frosting, the same cake I had made him every year since he was 6, and Renee opened the door and told me they were on their way out to dinner. "Connie made a reservation," she said. "We didn't think you'd be coming." I was standing on their porch holding a cake. He hadn't called to tell me. "No worries," I said. "I'll leave this for later." She took the cake from me and I got back in my car and drove home. I sat in my driveway for a few minutes before I went inside. The following spring is when they came to me about the house. They had been trying to buy something for over a year. The Columbus market was brutal. Everything was going above asking price, and they kept getting outbid. My son called me one evening, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Mom, we found something perfect, but we're 60,000 short for the down payment and the bank won't budge." A pause. "I know this is a lot to ask." He was right. It was a lot to ask. I had $340,000 in savings, the result of 31 years of showing up every morning at 6:30, buying my own school supplies when the budget ran out, working 2 summers at the district's literacy program because Gerald's illness had depleted our retirement more than we'd let on to anyone. That money was supposed to carry me through the last chapter of my life without depending on anyone. But I listened to my son's voice on the phone, and I thought about Gerald, who had always said that family doesn't let family drown, and I said, "How much do you need?" It wasn't 60,000. By the time we closed on the house with the down payment plus the closing costs I offered to cover, it was 312,000. I wrote the check. I signed the deed as the sole owner, on the advice of my attorney, a no-nonsense woman in Worthington who had handled Gerald's estate and who told me, "Ruth, at this amount, keep it in your name until they can buy you out. Protect yourself." I felt guilty listening to her. What kind of mother needs to be protected from her own child? But I signed it the way she said to sign it, and I didn't make a big thing of it. And my son and Renee moved into the house in June with a U-Haul and my son's college roommate and the bottle of champagne that Connie sent overnight from Cincinnati. Connie did not come for moving day. I did. I was there at 7 in the morning with boxes of cleaning supplies and a platter of sandwiches and bottles of water. I wiped down the kitchen cabinets. I assembled the bed frame in the master bedroom while my son carried boxes. Renee's friend helped her hang curtains in the living room. It was hot and sweaty and happy the way moving days are supposed to feel. "Doesn't it look beautiful?" Renee said, standing in the middle of the living room when we were done. She looked around at the high ceilings, the freshly painted walls, the afternoon light coming through the windows. "I can't believe this is ours." I smiled and agreed that it was beautiful. I didn't say, "It's mine, actually." I chose not to say that. I believed it didn't matter. Over the months that followed, I helped them furnish it. The dining table was mine. A solid oak piece I found at an estate sale in Grandview seats 8, the kind of table that's supposed to anchor a family. I had visions of Thanksgivings around that table, Christmases, Sunday dinners. I bought the washer and dryer. I contributed to the cost of the back patio set. I had the back garden reseeded in October because the soil was compacted and nothing was growing, and I wanted something green and living for them. By the time November arrived, I had put $312,000 and approximately 400 hours of labor into that house. I had a key. My son had given it to me. For emergencies, he said. I used it twice in 8 months, both times with advance notice, both times bringing food. The second time I arrived to find that the small bedroom, the one they'd shown me early on as your room, Mom, for when you come to stay, had been converted into a home office for Renee. The daybed I'd helped them assemble was pushed against the wall, covered in laundry. There was no space cleared for my things. I said nothing. I keep returning to that moment now and asking myself, why didn't I say something? And the answer I keep arriving at is the same. I had spent 30 years teaching other people's children to find their voices, and I had spent 60 years learning not to use mine. The first Thanksgiving after they moved in, Connie came to Columbus. She and her husband drove up from Cincinnati, a man who said very little and deferred to his wife on everything. And Renee and my son hosted dinner. I was invited, but the invitation came in a text from my son the Monday before. Casual, almost an afterthought. "Thanksgiving is here if you want to come." Around 4, I brought sweet potato casserole and the pecan pie. Connie had sent a cooler from Cincinnati 2 days earlier, a full catered spread from a specialty grocer, including a smoked turkey that arrived pre-sliced, a charcuterie arrangement, and 4 individually labeled desserts. When I walked in with my casserole dish, Renee was already arranging Connie's containers on the counter. She looked up when she heard the door. "Oh, Ruth." A beat. "You didn't need to bring anything." Her voice wasn't unkind. It just made clear that what I'd brought was unnecessary. I put the casserole on the counter beside Connie's charcuterie. I washed my hands. I came into the dining room and said hello to Connie, who was holding a glass of wine and telling my son something that made them both laugh. "Ruth," she said with the same two-handed handshake, "how are you settling into retirement?" I had been retired for nearly 2 years. We had spoken at least 4 times since then. She asked me this every single time, as though she genuinely could not retain the information that I had moved on with my life. "I'm doing well," I said. "Thank you." I sat at the dining table, the oak table I had purchased, and felt entirely invisible. The conversation at dinner was Connie's family, Connie's stories, Connie's opinions on the neighborhood and the school district, and the brand of coffee that was worth paying extra for. My son participated eagerly. Renee watched her mother with something that looked like admiration. Her father nodded, and I ate my sweet potato casserole and responded when I was spoken to, and looked at the table I had bought and the windows I had helped them choose and the walls that I had helped them paint. And I thought, I paid for this room, and I do not belong in it. What I didn't know yet was that my casserole was thrown out that night. Renee mentioned it 6 months later in a different argument, almost as a footnote, that casserole sat in the fridge for days. Nobody wanted it. And I thought about the 2 hours I'd spent making it, the pecans I'd bought, the way I'd driven it over in a dish with a lid so it wouldn't spill. I thought about all the ways you can throw something away without touching it. Christmas that year was the first real wound. In October, my son called to talk about the holiday. I had already been planning. It was Gerald's favorite holiday, and I still made a production of it, the ham, the cookies, the red tablecloth that had been in his family. I wanted to host at my place. "Come over on Christmas Eve," I said. "I'll make everything." My son went quiet. "Then the thing is, Mom, Connie and her husband are coming up for Christmas. They're going to be here Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I think we're doing everything here." I was quiet for a moment. "And me? Of course you'll come. Christmas Day, dinner around 4. Christmas Day. Not Christmas Eve, which had always been our tradition. Not the morning to watch him open anything. Just dinner at 4, when Connie's family would already have had the whole day." "Okay," I said. "That sounds fine." It was not fine, but I went. I brought the ham because they let me bring the ham, and I sat at the end of the table, the same table, while Connie made a toast that mentioned everyone by name except me. My son caught my eye for just a moment, and I saw something flicker in his face, some small recognition of what was happening. And then Renee said something, and he turned toward her, and it was over. I drove home at 8 o'clock. I sat in my car in the garage for a while, not ready to go inside. In February, my sister Teresa called me from Dayton. Teresa is 5 years younger than me and considerably less patient with nonsense than I am. "Ruth," she said, "I have to tell you something, and you're going to want to sit down." Her neighbor's daughter was a mutual acquaintance of Renee's through a book club, and apparently what circulated in that book club had recently reached Teresa's neighbor's kitchen table. What Renee had told her friends, in some form or another, was that my presence at family gatherings created tension, that I was too involved, and that Connie had privately said that having 2 mothers in the picture was confusing for the family dynamic. 2 mothers, I said. That's what she said. I sat with that phrase for a long time. 2 mothers, as though I were a competing interest. As though I did not have a biological and categorical claim on the title that Connie was politely suggesting I share. "How did Renee respond?" I asked Teresa. A pause. She agreed with her. She said you were nice, but that Connie was the one who really understood their life. After I hung up with Teresa, I went to my desk and opened the drawer where I kept the house documents. My name, sole owner. My attorney's contact information on a yellow sticky note inside the folder. I didn't make any decisions that night. I just sat there with the folder on my desk and the lamp on and the February wind against the windows. I want to be honest about something. I am not a person who acts on anger. I spent 31 years in a classroom, and the first thing you learn in a classroom is that impulse decisions make everything worse. You wait, you gather information, you think about what you actually want the outcome to be. What I wanted was to be respected. That was it. That was the whole of it. I called my attorney in March. I told her I needed to understand my options. She explained them the same way she always explained things, clearly and without drama. The deed was in my name. I could sell the property at any point without my son's consent. I could issue an eviction notice, 30 days, standard. And as there was no lease and no rent paid, they had no legal standing to contest it. The verbal agreement about eventual transfer of the deed was unenforceable. "Are you thinking of selling?" she asked. "I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about," I said. She understood. I did not do anything in March or April. I watched. I paid attention. I noticed that my son called less, that when I stopped initiating, 3 weeks could pass without any contact. I noticed that I was never told about plans in advance, only invited after the plans had been made around my absence. I noticed that when I brought things up, "I'd love to have dinner with you both sometime, just us," the answer was always soon, and soon never came. In July, Renee became pregnant. My son called to tell me. I cried. Genuine tears, the grateful kind. I told him I was so happy. I asked if I could come see them. "We're being careful about visitors right now," Renee said. She had taken the phone from him, apparently, just while I'm in the first trimester. "I'm sure you understand." I understood that Connie had been there the previous weekend. Teresa had seen her car in the driveway when she drove through Westerville on the way back from a work conference. I said congratulations and I love you both, and I hung up. That night I made a decision. Not from anger, from exhaustion, from the clear-eyed recognition that I had been paying for a relationship that was not being offered to me in return. I called my attorney the next morning. What would I need to do, I asked, to list the house by September? I found a buyer faster than I expected. My attorney knew a property investor who was looking specifically for single-family homes in Westerville School District for the rental market. He toured the house. We arranged it while my son and Renee were visiting Connie in Cincinnati for a long weekend. And he made an offer of $295,000. I had paid $312,000. I would absorb the difference. I was prepared for that. I told my attorney to proceed. Closing was scheduled for the Thursday before Thanksgiving. I chose the timing deliberately. Not to ruin the holiday, I want to be clear about that. I chose it because Thanksgiving was the one event where I had documented over 2 years exactly how I was treated in that house. I thought it was appropriate that the last chapter be written at the same table as the first one. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I drove to Westerville. I had packed the few things I'd kept in that spare bedroom: a cardigan, a pair of reading glasses, a photograph of Gerald that I had left on the nightstand. More out of stubbornness than anything else. I put them in a bag. I took my key off my keyring and set it on the kitchen counter. Then I went home and I waited. Closing was at 10 on Thursday morning. I sat at the title company's conference table with my attorney and the buyer's representative, and I signed my name 14 times, and I walked out with a cashier's check for $295,000. And I drove to my credit union and deposited it while the Thanksgiving morning traffic was still light. My son had texted the night before, "Dinner's at 4 if you want to come." Same as last year. I had replied, "I'll be there." I arrived at the house at 3:50. My son opened the door in his usual way, easy and warm when it was just us, and he hugged me in the entryway and took my coat. The house smelled of the catered food Connie had sent from Cincinnati. The oak table was set with a tablecloth I didn't recognize, probably Renee's. Connie and her husband were in the living room. Connie had the main armchair. "Ruth," she said, right on time. No hug. No rise from the chair. I sat in the same seat I always sat in, the one slightly separated from the main conversation, the one that communicated without words that the seating arrangement had not been designed with me in mind. We had drinks. Connie talked. Her husband nodded. Renee, visibly pregnant now and moving slowly, brought out appetizers from the kitchen. My son opened wine. I sat and watched and felt the familiar sensation of being in a place that I had paid for, surrounded by people who did not think of it that way. At 5 o'clock, Connie stood to make a toast. "I want to say how grateful I am," she said, "for this family that Renee and my son-in-law have built, for this beautiful home they've made, and for the life they're bringing into the world. She looked at Renee with a tenderness that made my throat close. Then she looked at everyone at the table, her husband, my son Renee, and she raised her glass. To family, they all said. She did not look at me. She did not include me in the sweep of the room. I was sitting 6 feet from her, and I was not there. I picked up my glass. I set it back down. I had the eviction notice in my purse. I waited until after dinner was cleared, until the pie was served. Connie's pie from Cincinnati, which was admittedly very good, until the conversation had loosened with wine and warmth and Connie was in the middle of a story about a cruise she and her husband were planning for the spring. Then I excused myself. I went to the powder room off the hallway. I took out my phone and texted my attorney, proceed. She had arranged for a process server. He arrived at 6:42. I was back at the table when my son got up to answer the door. I heard the murmur of voices. I kept my eyes on my dessert plate. My son came back into the dining room. His face had changed. "Renee," he said, "can you come here a second?" She looked at him, then at me, just briefly, just a flicker. She pushed her chair back and went to the hallway. Connie kept talking for about 30 seconds before she realized the room had shifted. She looked toward the hallway. We all heard Renee's voice first. Not the words, just the pitch of it rising. And then my son. What does this mean? They both came back into the dining room. Renee was holding the envelope. My son was holding the envelope. My son was holding the notice itself, reading it. His face was white. "Mom." He looked at me. "What is this?" Everyone at the table was looking at me. "It's an eviction notice," I said. "The house sold this morning. You have 30 days to vacate." The silence was the kind that takes up physical space. "You sold our house," Renee said. Her voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if she'd shouted. "My house," I said. "I sold my house." "How could you—" she started and then stopped. She looked at Connie. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully read, but I thought it looked like, "This is your fault." Connie stood up. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not contempt, something closer to shock. "Ruth, you can't do this to your own son." "I'm not doing anything to my son," I said. "I'm exercising my legal right over my own property." I looked at her steadily, which, incidentally, I paid for in full while you sent catered food from Cincinnati. She opened her mouth and then closed it. My son came around the table toward me. I expected anger. What I got was something worse, confusion. He looked like a 12-year-old who had just discovered that the rules he thought were permanent could change. "Mom, why didn't you say something? If something was wrong, you should have said something." And there it was, the thing that had been building for 2 years. The question that assumed I should have found a better way to be invisible. I did say something, I told him. I said it every time I brought food that went uneaten. I said it every time I drove back home from a holiday alone. I said it when I found out that I was described as a tension in your marriage. I paused. You just weren't listening. He stood there. He didn't deny it. "You have 30 days, I said. "I'm sorry it came to this. I genuinely am." I picked up my purse. "Merry Thanksgiving." I walked to the entryway. I found my coat where my son had hung it. I put it on. I heard Connie say something in the dining room, her voice cutting and low, and I heard Renee respond, and I heard my son say in a tone I had not heard from him since he was a teenager, "Mom, not right now." He wasn't talking to me. I closed the front door behind me. I sat in my car in the November dark for a few minutes, not moving, just breathing. The neighborhood was quiet. The houses around me were lit from within. Down the block, someone had already put up Christmas lights. I thought about Gerald. I thought about what he would say. Knowing him, he wouldn't have said much. He would have poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and eventually said, "Ruth, you did what you had to do." I believed that. I drove home. My son called 7 times that night. I let the calls go to voicemail and didn't listen to them until morning. There were 3 texts from Renee, one angry, one pleading, one that simply said, "How could you do this while I'm pregnant?" There was one from Connie's number that I didn't open. There was one from my sister Teresa, sent at 8:15. Renee called me. "Are you okay? Whatever you did, I'm on your side." I slept better than I had in months. The weeks that followed were hard in the way that doing a difficult right thing is always hard. My son found a real estate attorney and was briefly told, politely but clearly, that he had no grounds to contest the sale. He and Renee found a rental, a 3-bedroom in Gahana, within their budget, closer to Renee's office. They moved in mid-December. I didn't help them move. I offered in a brief text. Renee responded, "We're fine." I took her at her word. 2 weeks before Christmas, my son called and I answered. "I need to understand," he said. "Not I'm angry at you, not how could you, just I need to understand." That difference mattered. I told him everything. The casserole that was thrown away. The Christmas Eve that was taken from us without explanation. The phone call where Renee's friend told Teresa what circulated in the book club. The Thanksgiving toast that looked past me like I wasn't there. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know about the book club thing," he finally said. "I know. But I knew some of it. I knew things weren't right and I didn't fix it." "No," I said, "you didn't. I was afraid of her." He said it simply, without drama. "I know how that sounds. She's my wife. But Connie. When Connie is unhappy, the whole house is unhappy. And it was easier to manage things so she'd never be unhappy. And you were always the easier one to manage." That sentence landed in a place I hadn't expected. Not because it was cruel. He wasn't trying to be cruel, but because it was so accurate, so precise. I had spent my whole life being the easier one to manage, the one who could be quiet, the one who would understand. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know if that fixes anything, but I am." "It doesn't fix the house," I said. "I know. And it doesn't fix the last 2 years. I know that too." We stayed on the phone quietly for a moment. "Can I bring Renee to see you?" he asked. "Not to argue, just to talk. She wants to. I think she needs to say something to you." "You can come," I said. "Come Sunday." They came on a Sunday in December, just the two of them. Renee was 7 months pregnant and tired in the visible way that third trimesters produce. She sat in my living room on the good couch and looked at her hands for the first few minutes. My son sat next to her. "Ruth," Renee said, "I treated you badly. I let my mother make you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. And I kept telling myself it wasn't that serious, that you were fine, that you'd understand. And that was wrong." She said it plainly. No elaborate justification, no conditions attached. "Your mother," I said carefully, "is a woman who loves her daughter. I understand that, but she used that love as a way to make your home smaller. And you let her." "I did. Why?" She thought about it for a moment. "Because she'd always done it. My whole life it was normal to me to defer to her, to make her comfortable above everyone else." She looked up. "I didn't realize I was doing it until it was too late and you'd sold the house. It shouldn't have taken that," I said. "No, it shouldn't have taken that," I said. "No, it shouldn't have." She looked at me directly. "I can't give you back the house, or the money, or the 2 years, but I can be different. If you'll give me the chance." I looked at my son. He was watching me with the expression he'd had at 12 when he broken something valuable by accident. Not trying to dodge the consequences, just waiting to find out what they were. "I want to know my grandchild," I said, "really know them. Not as an afterthought. Not on the days when Connie's not available." "You'll be there," my son said, "first on the list. I need that to be real." "It will be." I believed him. Not because I had any guarantee, but because of the way he said it. With the voice he'd had before he learned to manage things. The baby came in February, a girl. My son called me at 6 in the morning from the hospital. "Mom, she's here." I could hear him crying. I cried too, right there in my kitchen, in my bathrobe. I was there that afternoon. Renee was exhausted and pale and more unguarded than I had ever seen her. The way childbirth strips away every performance you've been rehearsing. She let me hold the baby for a long time. She watched me with the baby, and there was something in her face that I hadn't seen before. Not the managed pleasantness she'd always offered me, but something more fragile and more real. "She has Gerald's nose," I said. Renee looked at the baby. "Tell me about him," she said. "Gerald. Tell me what he was like." Nobody had asked me that in years. Connie was there too later in the day. We occupied the room with a careful, wordless negotiation of space. She on one side, me on the other, both of us focused on the baby, both of us understanding without saying, so that this was the new arrangement, that the baby was the country we were both citizens of now, and that the borders had changed. She did not try to manage the room. It was the first time I had seen her not try to manage a room. As I was leaving, she caught my eye. A long moment. She looked older than she had at Thanksgiving, tired in a way that went past physical. "She's beautiful," Connie said. "About the baby." "She is," I agreed. We didn't say anything else, but it was the first exchange we'd had that felt like two people talking instead of one person performing and one person enduring. That was 14 months ago. My granddaughter's name is Alice. She has Gerald's nose and Renee's eyes and a completely independent personality that belongs entirely to herself. I see her every week, sometimes twice. My son drops her at my house on Tuesday afternoons when Renee has a late meeting, and Alice and I sit at my kitchen table, and I read to her from picture books, and she tries to eat the pages, and I think about Gerald, who would have been absolutely hopeless with her in the best possible way. I am still in my apartment. I have not bought anyone else a house. I spend my money on cooking classes I started taking last year and on a small pottery studio membership where I have become improbably decent at making bowls. I have lunch with Teresa once a month. I have a small group of women, retired teachers mostly, who I meet with on Friday mornings, and we talk about our children and our grandchildren and the ways we spent too many years making ourselves quiet so that other people could be comfortable. Renee and I are not close. I don't think we will ever be close in the way that some mothers and daughters-in-law become close, the way where you call just to talk, where you know each other's private hopes. But we are real with each other now, in a way we never were before. She tells me when she's struggling. She asked my opinion once about something difficult at her job and actually wanted the opinion, not just the validation. She called me on my birthday in September and we talked for 40 minutes. Connie came to Alice's first birthday. I was there. We sat at opposite ends of the table again, but this time it was just geometry, not intention. At one point, while the cake was being cut, she sat down next to me. She looked at Alice, who was covered in frosting, and laughing. "I owe you an apology," Connie said, quietly, without fanfare. I looked at her. "I made her feel like she had to choose," she said. "I didn't mean to, but I did. I've been thinking about it. My therapist has been thinking about it with me." A dry little laugh. "She's very thorough." "What made you go to therapy?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "My husband told me that I had spent our entire marriage making every room about me, and that he was tired." She paused. "He wasn't wrong. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the kindest response to honesty is just to let it exist. You didn't deserve what happened," she said, "and I'm sorry." "Thank you," I said. We watched Alice try to put a piece of cake directly onto her own head. We both laughed. I don't know how to end a story like this because it doesn't feel like it has an ending. It feels like it has an ending. It feels like it's still happening the way real things do. My son and I talk twice a week. Renee sends me photos of Alice with the frequency that feels like its own kind of apology, the ongoing kind. I hold my granddaughter on Tuesday afternoons and read to her and think about how long and strange the road was that led here. I think about the $312,000 sometimes, what it cost me, what it bought. It did not buy what I thought it would buy, which was belonging. It turns out, belonging can't be purchased. You can buy a deed. You can't buy a seat at the table. But I found my seat, just not the way I thought I would. I found it the night I signed the sale papers and drove to the credit union and deposited a check and went home to my apartment and made myself a cup of tea and sat in my own kitchen in the quiet of a Thursday morning and thought, this is mine. All of this, everything in this room is mine, and I am nobody's afterthought. If you are a mother who has been made to feel like a guest in your own family's life, I want you to hear this. You are not too sensitive. You are not dramatic. You are not difficult. You are a woman who has given things that cannot be returned, and you deserve to be seen, not managed, not accommodated, seen. You don't have to sell a house to reclaim yourself, but you do have to decide that you matter, that your presence at the table is not a courtesy extended by others but a right that belongs to you. That love which requires you to disappear is not love. It is just a more comfortable arrangement for everyone except you. I know that now. Gerald would have told me sooner, but I got there, and that matters too. If this story reached something in you, something you've been carrying quietly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Another woman who has been making herself small. Another mother who has been waiting for permission to take up space. You already have the permission. You always did. I've thought about what I would tell a younger version of myself. The woman who drove to that house at 7 in the morning with cleaning supplies and sandwiches, who wiped down cabinets that weren't hers yet, and assembled a bed frame in a room she'd never sleep in. I'd tell her, pay attention to what people show you, not just what they say. Because Connie showed me everything I needed to know at that rehearsal dinner. Renee showed me at the door with a birthday cake. My son showed me every time he chose the easier path over the honest one. I just wasn't looking clearly enough. That's not self-blame, that's just the truth. And the truth, when you finally sit down with it, is one of the most clarifying things a person can experience. What I've learned, not from a book, not from anyone's advice, but from living through those 2 years, is that there is a difference between love and accommodation. I loved my son. I was accommodating Renee. I was absorbing Connie. And I had confused all 3 of those things for the same action, which was being a good mother. They are not the same. Love asks something of both people. Accommodation only asks something of one. The $312,000 taught me that. Not the loss of it. I recovered most of it, and money was never really the point. What it taught me was what I had believed when I wrote the check. I had believed that generosity without expectation was a virtue, and in some contexts it is. But generosity without honesty is just a slow way of building resentment. I was generous, and I was silent, and I let the resentment accumulate for 2 years until the only language left was an eviction notice on Thanksgiving night. I wish I had said something sooner. I wish I had sat my son down after that first Christmas and said plainly, "This is not working, and I need you to see why." Not with anger, not with ultimatums. Just with the same directness I used in 31 years of teaching, the kind that respects the other person enough to tell them a hard thing. That is what I mean by moral courage. Not the dramatic gesture, not the sold house, the quiet, early, uncomfortable conversation, the one I kept not having because I was afraid of what it would cost me. What it actually cost me was 2 years and $15,000, and a relationship I had to rebuild from something close to nothing. But here is what came out the other side. My son found his own voice. Renee learned that the woman she'd been managing was a person worth knowing. Connie sat in a therapist's office and examined 50 years of patterns. And I make pottery on Tuesday mornings and hold my granddaughter on Tuesday afternoons. And I no longer apologize for taking up space in rooms I have every right to be in. That is what happens when people stop avoiding what's real. Things get worse before they get better, and then they get better in ways that the avoidance never could have produced. If you are somewhere in the middle of a story like mine, still being quiet, still making yourself smaller, still telling yourself it will get easier if you just wait, I want to offer you this. It does not get easier. It gets more settled. And there is a difference. You can settle into your own disappearance, or you can settle into yourself. Both take time. Only one of them is worth it.